The glass-walled boardroom fell silent the moment Madison Hayes walked in, her eyes gleaming cold under the white lights like the edge of a drawn blade. "You are all fired, every one of you." The words dropped with the weight of a sledgehammer against the marble floor, freezing the entire North Star Airlines leadership in place, their breath locked in their throats. They had no idea that the tall woman with the arrow-straight posture was the airline's largest shareholder, not until the very moment every mask they wore fell away. But this story did not begin here. It began in Detroit in a small room with cracked paint on the walls and a dream far bigger than the city itself. As a child, Madison Hayes learned early that the world was not fair, and people like her parents, one a worn-out bus driver and the other a nurse working the graveyard shift, were forced to fight in silence. She would hear her mother come home each morning, her footsteps heavy, as if every step carried the weight of a life that had never been allowed to rest. Those sounds, those quiet sighs swallowed by the dark, forged steel inside her. At 16, while her friends hung posters of celebrities on their walls, Madison hung a map. Harvard Fortune 500, her own empire. People called her ambitious, strange, even delusional, but she called it the only way to survive. The day she received her acceptance letter from Harvard, her mother cried, and her father held her longer than any embrace in his life. They did not know she was about to astonish the world even more. After graduating at the top of her class, Madison turned down every lucrative offer and founded Hayes Strategies at 27. She stormed into the corporate world like a relentless hurricane, never bending, never backing down. When corporations collapsed, she revived them. When companies lost money, she rebuilt them. And when people doubted the ability of a young black woman, she stayed silent and let the numbers answer. By 38, Madison had become a shadow billionaire, a player in the dark who quietly controlled the light. And that was when she saw North Star Airlines, a company rotting from the inside toxic culture, buried lawsuits, mistreated employees, discriminated passengers. It was not an investment opportunity. It was a systemic wound. Madison decided to buy the entire company without anyone knowing. Using a maze of shell corporations, she moved assets through layered structures, gathering shares piece by piece until she held 52% ownership without a single person realizing it. The day she signed the final acquisition, she whispered, "This is not revenge, this is repair." But fate always chooses its own moments to test whether someone is ready to rise. That moment arrived on a freezing morning at O'Hare Airport. Madison needed to fly to San Francisco to finalize a $600 million deal for a clean energy project. Success would not only bring profit, it would open thousands of new jobs in forgotten communities. She chose to fly commercial on the very airline she owned, wanting to see firsthand the culture that had begun to rot. What she did not know was that on this morning, North Star would reveal its truest face. As she stepped into the priority lane, a security officer named Carl Simmons, his voice raspy with prejudice, looked at her as if she had stolen the ticket. "First class?" he asked, tilting his head with a chilling skepticism. "Are you sure?" A wave of heat rose in Madison's chest, that familiar feeling she had spent a lifetime learning to swallow in order to survive. But today, it sank its teeth into her heart like a cornered animal. Carl inspected her ticket, as if searching for a flaw in her very existence. Then he reached for his radio. "Run additional screening on this passenger. Possible improper upgrade." The words cut like a blade she had felt 1,000 times before the blade society used to slice away the dignity of people like her. Madison stood still, her face expressionless, but inside every memory of being underestimated, doubted, diminished by prejudice, crashed over her like a tidal wave. As she walked through security, she heard the whispers behind her. Another one who thinks reward points get you a first-class seat, or a fake ticket. Happens a lot with that type. That type. 2 words that pierced straight through the armor she had spent her entire life forging. But she did not turn back. She could not allow them to see the wound. She could not show the pain. Because she had been born into a world where people like her had only 2 choices: fall or rise, taller than the contempt meant to break them. She chose to rise, but she had no idea that in just a few hours the very people who humiliated her would be brought to their knees by a truth they never saw coming. And when the airplane door finally closed, it was not just a flight taking off. It was the collapse of an entire system, and the awakening of a woman who refused to stay silent any longer. Madison Hayes, the woman dismissed at the airport that morning, was about to become the storm that would tear down every lie inside North Star Airlines. And the tragedy was only beginning. Madison stepped into the first-class cabin with the composure of a woman who had learned to hide her wounds beneath a polished layer of confidence, yet the invisible needles from that morning still threaded through her thoughts. The cabin was spacious, bright, luxurious, yet cold in the way an ancient courtroom feels cold, a place where the judging eyes of others serve as the only law. She rested her hand on seat 2, the seat she had paid for, the seat she imagined would be where she prepared her final notes for the $600 million deal. But some battles do not wait for a person to be ready, and today the fight had already begun, before she even knew she had stepped into the arena. Flight attendant Dylan Brooks glided past her, as though she were nothing more than a shadow on the floor. His perfectly styled blonde hair reflected the LED lights of the cabin, and his eyes held the casual contempt of someone who believed he understood the natural order of the world. Orange juice water or champagne, he said, but the question was not directed at her. He leaned in and placed a glass into the hand of a white businessman across the aisle, then smiled a smile Madison had not received since she first stepped into the airport that morning. She did not speak immediately. Years in the corporate world had taught her the value of observing, analyzing, and waiting for the exact moment to move. But when Dylan turned to leave, she said softly, "Excuse me, I would like a glass of water." Dylan paused, his expression tightening, as if her request were an unnecessary inconvenience. "We will serve beverages after takeoff." Madison looked at the glass he had just handed the man across from her. Then why were other passengers served first? A flicker of annoyance flashed behind his blue eyes. "That is the service standard. Please do not disrupt it." Then he placed the water in front of her with more force than necessary, enough to send a few droplets scattering across the tray table. Those droplets landed like cold echoes in her chest, familiar and unwelcome. It was the feeling she had endured throughout childhood and her entire career, the unspoken message people delivered without needing to say a word: "You do not belong here." But Dylan was not the only one intent on writing that message into her story. Just as the cabin doors were about to close, hurried footsteps and breathless irritation filled the aisle. Richard Caldwell Diamond studded watch, glittering under the lights, and a silver-gray suit worn by men accustomed to privilege strode into the cabin as though it were his personal kingdom. "Why is my seat not here?" He snapped his gaze, sweeping across the cabin before landing on Madison. In that instant, she was not a first-class passenger. She was a conclusion he had drawn without thought. This seat, he said, pointing at hers, must be a mistake. Terence Ward, the only flight attendant on duty, with genuine kindness in his eyes, stepped in to mediate. "So this seat is already occupied. We can check the system again." But Richard cut him off. "I am a Diamond Tier member. 15 years. I do not accept this kind of treatment." Every eye in the cabin turned toward Madison, as if they were spectators at a public trial, unashamed of their curiosity. Dillon reappeared with the purser, Marilyn Pierce. Her face was polished to perfection, but her eyes had the sharpness of someone accustomed to passing judgment. "Ma Marilyn," said her voice, sweet but poisoned at the edges, "we need you to move to the economy cabin to accommodate a special customer." Madison looked directly into her eyes. "I paid for this seat. I was not late. I see no reasonable explanation for being asked to relocate." Marilyn dipped her head slightly, maintaining a veneer of professionalism, but a sting laced her tone. "We believe you would be more comfortable in a more suitable area." "A suitable area?" The word slid into Madison's ears like a snake coiling around her throat. Instead of reacting on impulse, she unlocked her phone, opened the recorder, and set it on the tray table. "I want to confirm," Madison said, her voice calm to the point of danger. "You are asking me to leave the first-class seat I paid for to give it to this white man who arrived late, is that correct?" Dillon's eyes widened. Marilyn's face drained of color. Richard frowned, irritated at being included. "You are blowing this out of proportion," Marilyn said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hand trembled slightly. "I am simply asking for clarity," Madison replied. "The reason you are moving me to economy is because I am—" "What exactly?" Marilyn opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her silence revealed the truth before she spoke. Finally, she said quickly, almost as if trying to escape, "If you do not comply, we will have to call airport security." And Madison understood. She understood the trap people like her had fallen into for generations, that defending oneself only made them appear dangerous. She drew a slow breath, then stood with a presence no one could take from her. "I will leave the seat," she said, her voice soft as silk, yet sharp as a blade. But this does not end here. As she walked out of first class, the eyes tracking her were no longer harmlessly curious. They were the eyes of a society accustomed to deciding where people belong. In the economy cabin, whispers rose the moment she was pointed to the cramped middle seat between two strangers. A heavy-set man, a young woman, both looking at her, as though her presence diminished the value of their own seats. But the thing that cut deepest was not the murmurs. It was the weight of the realization that after all her years of success, of fighting, of climbing every rung, she could still be shoved back into the place society believed she belonged. But then Ethan, the only attendant willing to look at her with compassion, appeared and stepped outside the rigid lines of protocol. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Madison nodded. "I am fine," she said. "I am used to it." Ethan held her gaze for a moment, as if wanting to say that the world should never allow anyone to become used to that kind of pain. But Madison turned away. She did not want anyone to see the wound still bleeding inside her, because she knew that this pain would become her sharpest weapon. As the plane ascended into the sky, Madison looked out the window. The sky was high, vast, and endless, yet it had never made space for people like her. So she would carve out that space herself, or tear down the entire system and build it anew. This was no longer a flight. This was the beginning of a revolt, and somewhere ahead, North Star Airlines would pay for every ounce of humiliation they had inflicted on her today. Madison sat wedged between the cramped seats of the economy cabin, where the sounds of heavy breathing, irritated complaints, and luggage banging against armrests became the soundtrack to the humiliation she had just swallowed whole. Each time the plane trembled, the man to her left, large-framed and smelling of sweat mixed with cheap cologne, pushed a few more inches into her space, as if even his body reflected the invisible privilege of someone who believed he deserved more room than others. The young woman to her right rolled her eyes in quiet annoyance every time Madison shifted an elbow ever so slightly. The whispers floating from the rows ahead did not need to be loud for her to know they were meant for her. Probably a free upgrade gone wrong. Maybe a fake ticket that happens. She does not look like first class. The words did not carry through the cabin, but they did not have to. They cut straight through the heart of someone who had spent her entire life proving that her worth was not defined by the color of her skin. Madison closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself with a measured breath, a fragile thread of calm she fought to hold on to. But when she opened her eyes again, the sting was sharper. The man beside her leaned toward her. "What did you do to get kicked out of the upper cabin?" His tone dripped with judgment, the kind of tone meant for accusations dressed up as curiosity. Madison turned her head, her gaze cold as glass. "I existed." The man fell silent, though he did not apologize. People rarely apologized for the defects in their own lens. When the flight attendants came through with water, Madison was treated like she was invisible. Her cup was only half full. No ice, no polite acknowledgement. Not even eye contact, just a casual drop onto the tray table, as if she were being handed spare change. But Madison did not react. Not because she was weak, but because she was focusing on the bigger picture, a picture she intended to tear apart, piece by piece, come morning. When Ethan appeared cutting through the oppressive atmosphere with his quiet sincerity, Madison felt something shift. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, while checking the seatbelts in her row. "I am fine," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her. Ethan held her gaze with a recognition that ran deeper than courtesy. As the only black flight attendant in the first-class cabin that morning, he understood too well what it meant to live between two worlds, one that told him he did not belong, and another that insisted he was not worthy enough to cross its borders. "What they did was wrong," Ethan murmured, barely audible. "No one deserves that." His words brushed against a part of Madison she had locked away long ago, the place where every dismissal, every doubt, every exclusion had once gathered like stones in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice softening. "But I am used to it." Ethan looked as though he wanted to challenge that, to say, the world should not make anyone used to that kind of pain. But duty pulled him away. When the plane reached cruising altitude, Madison opened her phone and reviewed her presentation slides. Every metric, every graph, every data point stood as proof of a brilliance she had always needed to work twice as hard to have acknowledged. $600 million, 8,000 new jobs, a clean energy project capable of reshaping the national industrial landscape. Yet now these achievements sat beside a truth more bitter, that no matter who she became or what she accomplished, she could still be reduced, pushed aside, and treated as less because of the color of her skin. The dim cabin lights made her eyes burn, but she refused to let tears fall. Tears were not her weapon. Power was. About 1 hour later, Ethan returned this time with a careful glance over his shoulder. He angled his body slightly to shield Madison. "I have something for you," he said, placing a small card gently onto her tray table. "If you need to file a report, I will verify everything that happened." Madison looked down at the card. His name, his employee identification, his role. It was evidence. It was courage. It was a hand reaching out in a sea of turned backs. "Thank you, Ethan," she said slowly. "This will matter." He nodded, fully aware that a single act of integrity could send his career spiraling downward like a dried leaf in the wind, yet he still chose to do it. "People think staying silent protects them," Ethan whispered. "But sometimes silence only makes things worse." His words stayed with Madison for the rest of the flight. When the plane landed in San Francisco, she stepped out of her row last, not because she was forced to, but because she chose to observe, to remember. As she exited the aircraft, she saw Richard laughing with Marilyn and Dylan as if they had won some small battle, and her chest tightened with a crushing heaviness. But beneath that pain, a fire ignited. A fire hotter than humiliation, sharper than judgment, and stronger than every whispered insult. A fire that had once flickered years ago when she was a child, standing outside the math club door because she was told she did not look like the other children. Now that fire roared, bright, fierce, unstoppable. Madison had no idea that one of the premium cabin passengers had witnessed everything. No idea that this person would soon become pivotal in her path of upheaval. No idea that just a few hours later, she would sign the largest deal of her career, and at the same time, light the fuse of a reckoning North Star Airlines never saw coming. But as she walked out of the jet bridge, and the cold San Francisco wind lashed against her face, carrying the scent of sea salt, and something like a whispered warning, she understood one thing with absolute clarity. This was not the end of a flight. This was the beginning of a war. And Madison Hayes had never lost a war in her life, especially not one fought against injustice, especially not one she owed to herself. Madison stepped out of the San Francisco airport, wearing the calm expression she had fought hard to maintain, though the humiliation from the flight still throbbed in her chest like a wound that refused to close. A sleek black sedan waited at the curb, the driver swiftly opening the door, but Madison gave a slight nod, signaling that she needed a moment of silence. When the door shut, solitude rushed in, allowing her to exhale the first deep breath she had taken since leaving Chicago. The scenes from the plane replayed in her mind with painful clarity, as if someone were projecting them onto the car window. Richard Caldwell's smirk, Marilyn Pierce's cutting stare, Dylan Brooks's thinly veiled irritation, and above all the sensation of being pushed out of a place she had paid for, and rightfully earned, simply because they refused to believe someone like her belonged there. But Madison was not built to dwell on misery. She was built to act, and her actions were always cold, precise, and never rushed. As the car crossed the Bay Bridge, the city emerged through a thin veil of mist like an unfinished painting. The afternoon sun glimmered on the water, bright as a horizon calling her forward. Madison tightened her grip on her bag, the soft leather under her fingers, serving as a quiet reminder she could not allow emotion to dull her edge. Not today. She needed clarity. She needed sharpness. The meeting ahead would determine the future of nearly 8,000 workers tied to the clean energy project she was building. It was the only reason she had tolerated sitting in the economy cabin that morning. and it would be the reason North Star Airlines would someday kneel before she rebuilt it from the ground. In the glass-walled conference room on the 27th floor of Emerald Bay Investments, Madison stood before a large mirror and adjusted her blazer. Her charcoal grey suit hugged her form just enough to convey elegance and just rigid enough to announce the authority of a leader who did not flinch before pressure. When she entered the room, the surrounding conversations fell silent. 7 men and women turned toward her, not because of her skin tone, but because of the force she carried, the gravitational pull of someone who stepped into a space and instantly became its center. "Welcome, Ms. Hayes." Victor Chen, founding partner of Emerald Bay, rose to shake her hand. "We have heard remarkable things about Hayes' strategies." Madison offered a small, controlled smile, the kind that did not bear teeth, but radiated absolute confidence. "I hope today gives you even more reason to believe in me." The meeting began with the velocity of sharp financial minds at work. Madison activated the projector, and each slide landed like a hammer, shattering any lingering doubt. She spoke of her renewable energy technology, of a closed-loop supply chain that reduced waste by 60% of a green manufacturing model capable of transforming the country's heavy industry. But what made seasoned investors tilt their heads was not just the data. It was the way she told the story behind it. "We are not here solely to generate profit," Madison said, placing her hand over a slide showing a map of the United States. "We are here to breathe life back into communities that have endured too many winters in the dark. Places where a new facility means hundreds of families no longer worry about dinner. Places where a single investment can rewrite the skyline." Her eyes gleamed not with arrogance, but with an unbreakable conviction. When she finished her presentation, the room held 3 seconds of absolute silence. 3 seconds that stretched like a century. Then Victor leaned back, tapping the table thoughtfully. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice calm and resonant. "In my career, I have reviewed more than 2,000 presentations. Very few have made me feel as though I were looking at a truly new future." He paused. "Yours is one of them." Madison kept her expression composed, but her heart tightened with a release that felt like being freed from invisible chains. The discussion continued for 2 more hours, and when it ended, they did not simply agree to the original $600 million investment. They proposed $900 million, along with a long-term partnership that could position Hayes Strategies as the national leader in sustainable energy within the next 10 years. As the group packed their documents, Madison prepared to leave, but a woman approached her. Linda Chen, CFO of Sequoia Partners, someone who had been in the premium cabin that morning. "Ms. Hayes," Linda said, her expression serious, her voice gentle. "I was on your flight earlier today." Madison stopped, a chill sliding down her spine. "I saw everything," Linda continued, "from the moment they questioned you at security to the moment they forced you out of your seat. And I want to say first that I am deeply sorry you had to endure that." Madison said nothing, but her eyes softened for a heartbeat. But more importantly, Linda added, lowering her voice, "I sat there watching you, and I thought, if she can walk into this room and present like that only a few hours after being treated so poorly, then she is not an ordinary executive. She is someone who can change entire systems." The words struck through Madison's thoughts like a beam of light piercing the storm cloud that had followed her since morning. And at that moment, she understood something clearly. The humiliation on that plane was not the final truth. It was an invitation to tear apart what had decayed for far too long. When she stepped out of the building, the evening wind lifted a few strands of her hair, and instead of exhaustion, she felt the electric charge of a storm gathering strength. She pulled out her phone and dialed the first number that came to mind. "Mark," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "Prepare the strategy room. Meeting tonight. About North Star," her chief counsel asked. Madison looked up at the sky, where North Star aircraft sliced through the clouds, bold and oblivious. "Yes," she said, her gaze darkening. "It is time they learn who truly owns the sky they are flying in." The wind continued to blow, and in it Madison heard the distant echo of the war. She was ready to wage a war she would not merely win, but transform forever. The Seattle night carried a cold that cut clean through the skin, but Madison Hayes stepped out of the black sedan, as if she felt none of it. The city lights reflected against the glass of the high-rise where she lived, forming shifting patches of brightness and shadow that mirrored her mood, a mixture of anger, resolve, and the sharp, controlled calm that only appears in someone who has endured too much pain to still be afraid. When the penthouse door opened, the warm scent of polished wood and the soft golden lighting made the space look like a temporary sanctuary, but no one inside looked relaxed. Mark Dempsey, his graying hair and seasoned eyes, marking him as a man who had battled hundreds of lawsuits, stood reviewing documents on the large screen. Zoe Carter Madison's assistant and right hand flipped through her notebook with the speed of someone whose mind never knew rest. Lucas Grant, the razor-sharp chief technology officer, was linking into North Star Airlines' data analysis systems. And finally there was Sienna Lowe, the independent investigator, famous among corporate circles for her ability to drag hidden truth out of the dark. All four rose when Madison entered. No one wasted time with greetings. They saw in her eyes something far more important than a polite welcome. This was not a routine meeting. This was the beginning of a purge. Madison removed her coat, set her bag aside, and stood straight, scanning the room as if she were surveying a battlefield before the first strike. "Let's begin," she said, her voice low and precise. Mark turned the large screen toward her. "We have compiled the initial data from North Star. What happened to you was not an isolated incident, Madison. It is the result of a rotting system." Lucas tapped a button, and charts and documents flooded the screen. Buried reports, altered internal assessments, customer complaints involving discriminatory behavior, marked as lacking evidence, swept into the category of unprocessable. Zoe pushed her glasses up, her voice taut as a tightened string. 217 discrimination-related reports in 3 years, only 6 addressed, none resulting in policy changes. They suppressed everything, Mark added. And not just with passengers. Their employees face the same treatment, especially those of color. Sienna opened a thick folder. "I reviewed the staff involved in the incident on your flight this morning. This was not a momentary lapse. This is systemic behavior." She placed 3 documents on the table. Marilyn Pierce, 11 years as purser. Multiple complaints from junior staff accusing her of favoritism and insulting remarks, all dismissed. Dylan Brooks, 3 years as flight attendant. Promoted unusually fast despite mediocre performance reviews. Family connection to a member of the board. And Richard Caldwell, diamond-tier passenger major businessman whose company holds a travel contract worth more than $10 million with North Star. And Sienna paused, looking directly at Madison as if preparing to drop a final blow. He has a personal connection to CIO Wesley Cole. Lucas stepped in. Cole sent internal emails instructing human resources on how to handle discrimination cases. The directive was explicit: suppress, stay quiet, avoid media exposure. Madison stood silent for a long moment. No one in the room dared break the quiet, because they could feel what was forming inside her. It was not rage, it was a decision that could reshape the fate of a company of 20,000 employees. "What about Ethan Ward Madison?" asked her voice, low and steady. Zoe opened another file. 11 years with the airline, stellar evaluations, submitted 4 reports on discrimination, all rejected. He is labeled as disruptive for attempting to change workplace culture. Madison closed her eyes briefly, as if to etch the name into her memory. Ethan, the only person on that plane who saw her as a human being, the only one who did not bow to injustice. When she opened her eyes again, they gleamed like a blade, tempered long enough to endure fire. They believed they could treat me like that. Madison said each word heavy as stone, like an ordinary passenger, an ordinary black woman. She looked at the screen where the names of Marilyn, Dylan, Richard, and Wesley glowed like a list of those awaiting judgment. "They do not know who I am," she said. Lucas inhaled. "So what is the plan?" Madison stepped forward. Her voice dropped deep as thunder rolling before a storm. "We will not file a lawsuit. We will not negotiate. We will not send warnings. Then what will we do?" Zoe asked. Madison looked at her team, the people who had followed her through brutal restructuring campaigns and impossible corporate wars, and she told them the one thing none of them expected to hear. "We take North Star Airlines back, publicly." Sienna froze. Mark lifted his head, eyes bright with the understanding that this would shake not just a corporate hierarchy, but an entire industry. "You want to remove the CEO?" Mark asked. "Not just the CEO," Madison answered. "I want to dismantle the entire system that protected him. Every executive who allowed that toxic culture to exist." Lucas frowned. "You will need more shares to gain absolute control." Madison nodded slightly. "Tomorrow I buy an additional 6%. That brings us to 58. And when I walk into their boardroom, I want them to understand that the storm they created is going to sweep them away." Zoe hesitated. "Are you sure you want to use your personal experience as the catalyst for a full-scale corporate overhaul?" Madison turned toward the window, Seattle glowing cold and metallic beyond the glass. "This is not about me," she said, her voice so steady that the room fell still. "This is about every person they have humiliated who did not have the power to fight back." She faced them again, her eyes sharp, proud, and fierce enough to raise the temperature of the room. "And I do have power." She paused. "And I will use it." The night stretched until dawn. They prepared documents, collected evidence, rebuilt organizational structures, drafted strategic strikes. But amid the numbers, the plans, and the tactics, there was one quiet moment none of them forgot. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, Madison stood before a photograph of her parents, 2 people who had spent their lives confronting injustice without a voice. She placed her hand on the frame. "I will do what you could not," she whispered. Outside the window, the sun began to rise over the Seattle horizon. The first light of a new day fell across Madison's face, as if the world were preparing to witness the awakening of an empire no one had seen coming. And Madison Hayes, still carrying the sting of being forced into an economy seat, was ready to rewrite the entire history of North Star Airlines. But the true storm, the one that would shake the sky itself, was only beginning. Before the Seattle sunlight could break through the thick morning clouds, Madison was already seated in the black sedan, heading to a small midtown cafe where she was meeting the person she believed would become a crucial link in the downfall of North Star Airlines. When the car pulled up, she stepped out, the early morning chill striking her face, though her heart still burned like hot coal. She chose a secluded corner table, her back against the wall, and her eyes fixed on the entrance, a habit shaped by dozens of high-stakes deals that demanded constant vigilance. When the glass door opened for the third time, Ethan Ward walked in. Still dressed in his navy blue flight attendant uniform, yet something in his expression had shifted caution worry, and tucked somewhere beneath them, a fragile flicker of hope he was afraid to acknowledge. He saw her, and in that instant, both understood this meeting was no simple conversation. It was the crossroads of two lives, hers and his, each about to veer into dangerous and irreversible territory. "Thank you for coming," Madison said as Ethan sat down. Her voice was calm and steady, but underneath ran the sharpness of someone measuring the space between trust and betrayal. Ethan nodded, his hands clasped tightly together on the table, the posture of a man who knew his life was about to change course. "I am not sure why you wanted to meet," he admitted, "but I assume it has to do with what happened yesterday." "Yes," Madison replied, eyes never leaving him. "And also not only yesterday." She placed an envelope on the table. "This is the internal investigation data my team gathered about North Star. I want you to see it." Ethan opened the envelope and began reading. With each page, the color drained from his face. He saw buried reports, qualified employees denied promotions, passengers discriminated against, and among the ignored complaints his own sent over the years, yet never answered. "My God," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I always knew something was wrong, but I didn't realize it was this bad." Madison observed him carefully, watching the final puzzle piece slide into place. "You lived inside that system," she said. "You saw things others ignored. You know exactly how rotten it is." Ethan lifted his head, his dark eyes reflecting the familiar pain of someone who had stayed silent too long. "There was one time," he said slowly, "when a passenger was verbally attacked with racial slurs right in front of me. I filed a report. I believed they would handle it seriously. Instead, I received a warning for creating a negative environment with co-workers. That was when I understood this company does not care about right or wrong." His voice hitched. I just wanted to do the right thing. But every time I tried, they found a way to shut me down." Madison leaned forward. "And what if you had a chance to change everything?" Ethan stared at her, doubtful. "What could someone like me possibly do?" She slid a second envelope toward him. "Not alone," Madison said. "With me." Ethan opened it. Inside was an official offer letter for the position of Senior Director of Customer Experience, reporting directly to the incoming CEO. Below it was the seal of Hayes Strategies, along with Madison's provisional signature. "This is not a joke, is it?" Ethan asked, his voice faint, barely above a breath. Madison shook her head. "North Star needs someone who understands the pain of its customers. Someone who has stood between two worlds, who knows what it feels like to be dismissed, yet still chooses to serve with grace." But Ethan glanced down at his worn uniform. "I am just a flight attendant." "No," Madison said sharply, her voice slicing through the air. "You are someone who did the right thing, even when everyone around you chose silence." Ethan lowered his gaze, and Madison noticed his eyes glistening. Not tears, but the shine of a man who had endured so much disappointment that he no longer believed the world would give him a real chance. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Madison answered without hesitation. Because I do not need perfection. I need someone real. Ethan looked up, and in his eyes, Madison saw gratitude fair, and most importantly, a growing ember of trust, even if he was not ready to name it yet. So what do you want me to do? Madison leaned back, her expression sharpening. I need you to continue your normal duties for the next 2 days. Observe, take notes, and tomorrow night, send me a list of the people you believe are good and those you know are the root of the problem. And the third day, Ethan asked. Madison smiled, the kind of smile worn by someone who has just decided the fate of an empire. On the third day, we walk into North Star headquarters together. Ethan swallowed. You are saying yes, Madison said firmly. I am taking back the airline, publicly, and I want you beside me. The words dropped between them like a vow. Ethan drew a long, steady breath. If I agree, there is no turning back, Madison nodded. That is true. But there is no turning back for the world you want to live in either. The moment stretched, then Ethan extended his hand. A trembling but resolute handshake. A handshake that could change the future of North Star Airlines. I am in, he said. Madison clasped his hand. Welcome to the fight. When they stepped out of the cafe, the Seattle wind blew stronger, as if the city itself sensed something monumental approaching. A storm was forming, but this time the storm stood with the forgotten, and leading it was Madison Hayes, the woman once shoved out of a first-class seat, now preparing to drag an entire corporation off the decaying throne it clung to. The battle had found its ally, and the sky ahead was shifting. The next 2 days passed like the pounding beats before the war drums begin, while North Star Airlines continued operating as if what they had done on that flight was nothing more than a forgettable inconvenience beyond their walls. An unseen machine was tightening a noose around them. Madison Hayes didn't leave Seattle. She worked through the nights with her team, gathering evidence, analyzing the system, and rebuilding the map of the decayed power structure rotting through the airline. Meanwhile, Ethan Ward, once an anonymous flight attendant, was becoming the eyes and ears Madison needed to expose the entire network of internal manipulation. He began documenting every action, every expression, and even the whispers exchanged among his co-workers. He reported everything to Madison during late-night calls, and just 1 day was enough to strengthen the resolve in both of them. What did Marilyn say to the new flight attendant, Madison asked during their 11 o'clock call. Ethan exhaled disappointment, coloring his voice. She told her not to be too friendly with passengers from the special group, because they tend to complain for no reason. The special group, we both know who that means. Madison narrowed her eyes, tightening her grip on her pen. Good. Write it down exactly. We will need the full context, Ethan continued. And Dylan, he bragged in the break room that his uncle on the board promised to get him promoted to cabin supervisor. He does not have the certification. He does not have the required service hours, and he got 3 complaints last month. From Madison's end, Zoe cut in, her voice sharp as steel. That is protected nepotism. We need to prove the favoritism is systemic. Ethan hesitated, and the worst part, everyone knows. But everyone is scared. Madison closed her eyes for a beat. The silence stretched, and though Ethan did not feel anger from her, there was something else, something more dangerous, the stillness of someone preparing a killing strike. Tomorrow, she said slowly, gather the names of everyone who has been bullied, dismissed, or sabotaged by Marilyn or Dylan. We are not fixing the surface. We are dismantling the entire iceberg. While Ethan carried out his mission, Madison's team worked like a machine, that had no concept of time. Lucas dug into North Star's internal systems, uncovering truths the leadership never intended to see daylight, altered records, manipulated performance evaluations, and even internal emails showing illegal preferential treatment for special VIPs, a coded phrase for wealthy and white passengers. Madison Lucas called tension threading his voice. "You need to see this." On the 72-inch OLED screen, a series of emails appeared. The sender was CEO Wesley Cole. The content read, "Reduce compensation for passengers from the Negative Reaction Group. Do not change policy for them. Just keep them silent." Below it was the response from the head of Human Resources. "Understood. I will adjust the complaint handling process to avoid escalation." Mark stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. This is systemic discrimination, documented in writing. If this goes public, North Star will plummet like a stone thrown off a cliff. Madison did not turn from the screen. She stared at it the way someone studies the exposed soul of a creature that has been stalking them. "Not yet," she said. "I want everything released at the exact moment it will trap them. When I walk into that boardroom, I want them cornered with no exit." Sienna added more evidence. At least 43 employees of color were rated below their performance. Several were demoted for being culturally incompatible. Corporate culture, she let out a dry laugh. Or should we call it racial culture? Zoe took a sip of coffee, her eyes burning bright. "This coup will shake the entire aviation industry, Madison." Madison finally turned toward her team, her gaze sharp enough to cut. "Then make sure the earthquake starts with me." By the end of day 2, Ethan sent Madison a list far longer than anyone expected, 27 employees who had been mistreated by Marilyn and Dylan. Some had been publicly humiliated. Some had been quietly sabotaged. Some tried to speak up, only to be labeled as disrupting team unity. Several had resigned because the pressure became unbearable. But they all had one thing in common. None of them had ever been heard. Madison read each statement, each story, each trembling recollection Ethan had gathered. Every word felt like a needle piercing her skin, not only because of the cruelty within North Star's leadership, but because Madison had once been one of them, a person forced to swallow injustice to survive. Then her phone rang. Ethan again. "I found something else," he said. "What is it? Wesley Cole is coming to headquarters on Tuesday morning to finalize the quarterly financial report. I heard rumors he is about to announce a restructuring plan. And if I heard correctly, he hesitated. It will eliminate hundreds of employees from the branch with the largest number of staff of color." Madison shot to her feet, her pulse pounding. "Exactly what I expected," she said, her voice turning icy. North Star is not just practicing discrimination. They are optimizing discrimination. She turned to her team. "Prepare everything for the board meeting. Documents, evidence, data. I want them suffocated by the truth they buried." Mark smirked, half impressed, half anticipating the battlefield ahead. "You seem very eager for this meeting," Madison replied without the slightest tremor. "I have waited for it my entire life." The second night ended, with the completed strategy laid out on the table, the board meeting set for 2:00 in the afternoon, where Madison would appear for the first time as the controlling shareholder. A full arsenal of evidence, a declaration of power, and the list of those who would be removed: Wesley Cole, Marilyn Pearse, Dylan Brooks, and Richard Caldwell. And Ethan Ward, he would stand at her right side, no longer a flight attendant, but a rising symbol of justice within North Star. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Madison stepped onto the balcony, the cold wind slashing against her skin, though she felt as if she were standing inside a furnace. In the distance, North Star planes rose into the night sky. But Madison knew that in just a few hours the fate of the entire airline would not be decided by those planes. It would be decided by her. A woman once stripped of a first-class seat, but this time she would strip them of their throne. And the storm was ready to form. On the third day at noon, Seattle lay beneath a pale light filtered through a heavy gray sky, yet nothing could dim the fire blazing inside Madison Hayes. The black sedan sliced through crowded streets, heading straight toward North Star Airlines' headquarters. The towering glass building reflected a cold sheen, standing tall like the fortress of an empire far too accustomed to being untouchable. But today that fortress would tremble. Madison sat in the back seat, her entire body drawn tight like a bowstring pulled to its limit. Her navy suit fit her with precise elegance, every seam echoing the resolve radiating from her. Resting on her lap was a black briefcase containing the evidence that would cut through the noose protecting the ruthless figures running the airline. Zoe glanced over from the front seat. "Are you certain you want to open this yourself?" Madison did not blink. "This is my battle. I will walk in first." She turned to Zoe, her gaze steady, deep as midnight. "I was dragged out of a first-class seat like someone unworthy of respect. Today they will learn who decides who sits where." When the car stopped at the entrance, Madison stepped out. The wind whipped against her perfectly tied hair, but she did not pause to adjust it. Every step she took echoed sharply against the stone floor, like war drums announcing judgment. Inside the lobby, the receptionist looked up and froze for a moment at the authority emanating from her. "Hello. How may I assist you?" Madison placed her shareholder verification papers on the counter. "I am here for the 2 o'clock board meeting." The receptionist glanced at the document. Then her eyes widened to disbelief. "You are the controlling shareholder." "Yes," Madison replied, her voice as sharp as a diamond cut. "And I do not wish to be delayed." A mid-level manager rushed out, face pale with shock. "Ms. Hayes, we were not informed." "Of course not," Madison interrupted, her tone soft but icy. "If you had been informed, I would not get to see your genuine reactions." The manager swallowed hard and led her forward. No one spoke in the elevator, but the silence itself felt like the heavy knocking of fate on the door. When the elevator opened on the 42nd floor, Madison saw a familiar scene. A long, carpeted hallway, cold white lights, and at the end, a pair of walnut double doors leading to the boardroom, where decisions impacting millions of passengers were made. The difference was that today, the decision belonged to her. Outside the boardroom, board members chatted casually, their faces relaxed, unaware that a storm was heading straight toward them. When Madison appeared, the air froze. Victor Chen, one of the few who recognized her from the San Francisco deal, arched an eyebrow. "You truly came." Madison smiled faintly. "I said I would. Some matters must be handled face to face." Before he could speak further, the boardroom doors opened. Wesley Cole, CEO of North Star Airlines, stepped out with neatly combed silver hair and a confident smile that belonged to a man used to watching others bow. But when he saw Madison, that smile faltered, collapsing like a mask ripped from his face. What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice skipping a beat. Madison did not answer immediately. She looked into his eyes with a gaze strong enough to expose the weakest corners of a man. "I am here," she said, "to reclaim what is mine." When they entered the boardroom, every eye turned toward her. The long wooden table, the high-backed leather chairs, the panoramic window overlooking the Seattle skyline, everything belonged to the realm of absolute power. But today that power belonged to no one but Madison Hayes. She stood at the head of the table, the CEO's seat. Wesley objected instantly. "That is my seat." Madison placed the briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. Not anymore. Mark, Zoe, Lucas, and Sienna entered behind her, each placing a stack of documents before the board members. Wesley glared. "What do you think you are doing? This is a closed session, and I am the person who decides who may attend, Madison." Cut in her voice, low sharp and fully in command. "I own 58% of North Star Airlines. I am the authority in this room." Silence dropped over the room like a stone. Thick, heavy, stunned. One of the board members stammered, This cannot be. How did you—" "In a way none of you ever expected," Madison answered. "I have been acquiring North Star piece by piece through shell companies. Over the last 3 years, Wesley's face flushed red with fury. "You came here for what, blackmail?" A few policy adjustments. Madison opened the briefcase and pulled out the printed internal emails. "I am here," she said, voice like a honed blade, to reveal the truth. Lucas pressed a button on the remote. The large screen lit up. Racist emails, internal cover-ups, falsified reports, orders to silence customer complaints, everything projected for the board to see. A board member whispered in shock. Good heavens, Madison fixed her eyes on Wesley. "You built a system of discrimination, a system that harmed customers' employees and the company's reputation. You turned North Star into a place where justice could not take flight." She placed another stack of documents on the table. "And yesterday morning, I became its next victim." The entire board fell silent. "You were a victim of North Star?" someone asked. Madison nodded. "Yes. I was removed from a first-class seat I paid for because a white man arrived late and claimed he deserved it more. And your employees enabled it." The boardroom doors opened. Ethan Ward walked in, no longer in uniform, wearing a suit, his eyes steady, his stride firm. A few board members recognized him. "You are the flight attendant from yesterday." Ethan stood beside Madison. "Yes, and I am ready to testify." Madison gave him a subtle nod, then faced the board. Today, she said, her voice resonant and unshakable, every word landing with the weight of a verdict. "I exercise my rights as controlling shareholder to make my first decision." She looked directly at Wesley. "Wesley Cole, you are removed as CEO, effective immediately." The board erupted. Wesley shot to his feet. "You cannot do this." "I can," Madison replied. "And I just did." She turned to the rest of the board. Any objections? Not a single hand rose. Acceptance by silence. Surrender. Madison continued. "Next, Marilyn Pierce is terminated. Dylan Brooks is terminated. Richard Caldwell is permanently banned from flying, and all corporate contracts with North Star are dissolved." Then she delivered the sentence that shattered the air in the room. "And I will appoint a new CEO." She turned to Ethan. "Ethan Ward will serve in this role temporarily until the formal process is completed." Ethan froze. The board gaped. Then Victor Chen smiled. "I support this," he said. Another board member nodded. "I agree." A third echoed approved. Finally, Madison delivered the line that marked the dawn of a new era. North Star Airlines will no longer be a symbol of exclusion. Starting today, it will be a symbol of justice, and I will be the one to lead it there. The boardroom fell silent again, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Because they all knew, not only was an airline being transformed, A system was collapsing, and an empire was rising from the pain of a woman once forced out of a first-class seat. But today, she had claimed the highest seat of all, and this was only the beginning. After the upheaval that shook the boardroom, North Star Airlines felt like a massive ship forced into a sudden turn, stunned and off balance, with no path back to its old course. Emails had been exposed, wrongful decisions dragged into the light, and the faces that had occupied powerful seats for decades were now being escorted out of the building by security. And as Madison stood before the 42nd floor window, watching planes bearing the North Star logo rise into the sky, she knew she had not merely changed a company. She had ignited a wave no one could stop. The work in the following days moved with the force of a storm. Madison met non-stop with legal teams, human resources, communications, and finance. Each outdated policy was dissected, every flawed procedure taken apart, like rusted machinery before being replaced with a new standard. Employees who had been silenced for years were called in to be heard. A middle-aged black woman teared up when Madison personally apologized for her being denied a promotion she was fully qualified for. A young Asian employee who had been drafting a resignation letter received an email inviting him to join a new leadership development program. And across the country, news of the transformation spread like wildfire. Madison tolerated no inertia. She stood in the headquarters auditorium for the first all-company meeting after the takeover, the lights casting a decisive glow across her face, holding the attention of thousands. "I did not come here to destroy North Star, Madison," said her voice echoing through the vast hall. "I came here to rebuild it from the ground to the very top. This will no longer be an airline for a privileged few. It will be an airline for everyone." The room erupted into applause. Some people cried. Some exchanged looks of disbelief that such words were truly being spoken aloud. Ethan stood in the front row, no longer the quiet flight attendant stationed in first class. The way he stood now was the way a leader stands, though he still felt his heart pounding as Madison continued delivering a message the entire aviation industry would remember. "Starting today, I am establishing the North Star Justice Fund, a fund to compensate every victim of discrimination over the past 10 years. No one will be silenced again." The press waited outside. The moment Madison exited the auditorium, cameras pivoted toward her. Reporters rushed forward questions, firing like hail. "Do you think firing the CEO was too extreme? Are you concerned about stock volatility? What pushed you to act so decisively?" Madison stopped, turned to face them, her expression calm but sharp as forged steel. "I do not worry about stock prices falling," she said. "I worry about people falling from opportunities that should have been theirs." Within hours, the quote went viral across social media. But the world's true shock came from within the company. No more meetings where people were afraid to speak. No more secret emails. No more decisions made behind closed doors to protect privilege. Madison oversaw a complete review of all 12,000 personnel files. Employees once excluded from promotion lists were re-evaluated under a new system. Those with real talent were finally given opportunities to prove themselves. North Star felt like a body expelling its own poison, painful but liberating. During that time, Ethan worked without rest. He traveled to multiple branches, speaking with employees, listening to their experiences. Some nights he returned to headquarters with red eyes, telling Madison stories of pain he once believed he suffered alone. And each time, Madison placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "That is why you were chosen." One afternoon, while reviewing the new training framework, Ethan paused and looked at Madison for a long moment. "You know," he said quietly, "on that flight, when they forced you out of first class, I thought this is the world. This is how it always works. But today, standing here, I see the world can be different." Madison smiled, her eyes carrying the unbreakable resilience that had become her signature. "The world changes only when someone is willing to walk into the heart of the storm," she replied. "That day they pushed me out of a first-class seat. But you know what? That seat was far too small for where I am sitting now." Ethan laughed a laugh, carrying years of fear lifting from his shoulders. North Star's rebirth happened so rapidly, the entire aviation industry staggered to keep up. Competitors began internal audits. Market analysts labeled Madison the woman redefining corporate leadership. But titles meant nothing to her. What mattered was that the economy seat she had been forced into had become the lever she used to lift an entire system into the light. And as the sun set behind the North Star Tower, streaking gold across the glass like a blessing upon a new era, Madison knew she had done the right thing. Not for herself, but for everyone who had ever been forced to sit in a seat where they did not belong. The battle was not over, but the sky was already brighter. 1 year after the North Star Airlines boardroom shook under the seismic blow delivered by Madison Hayes, the Seattle sky opened in a rare, clear shade of blue. Today was a special day, the inauguration of the airline's new first-class lounge, the Equity Lounge, a symbol of the era Madison and her team had built through pain, courage, and decisions unlike anything the aviation industry had seen before. As Madison stepped into the ribbon-cutting area, camera lenses turned toward her, no longer with scrutiny, but with respect, with gratitude from people who understood she had dared to do what an entire system had avoided for decades. Her pure white suit stood out against the bright, elegant space, the warm wood tones blending with custom artwork created by minority artists, a clear message that this place belonged to everyone. Terrence Ward, now the youngest CEO in North Star history, stood beside her. Gone was the anxious, suppressed flight attendant of the past. In his place was a leader who understood he represented real change. When he bowed slightly to the guests, the applause echoed off the glass walls. "Thank you all for being here," Terrence said, his voice warm and strong. North Star was once a place where silence was used to bury pain. But today, we stand here to prove that transparency, dignity, and kindness are the values that will take us higher. Madison looked at Terrence, and for a moment she saw the transformation of a man who once stood quietly, witnessing injustice without the power to speak. Now he shaped the culture of tens of thousands of employees. The credit did not belong to one person, but the truth was undeniable. Madison had opened the door for him, and he had opened hundreds more for others. After Terrence's speech, Madison stepped forward. She did not need a microphone to command attention. The air itself seemed to still when she approached the small podium. 1 year ago, she began her voice, cutting through old memories. I was pulled out of a first-class seat I had paid for. Not because I was wrong, but because the system believed I didn't belong there. Some guests bowed their heads, some wiped tears. Madison continued, steady, not angry, simply truthful. But I stand here today not to retell a painful story, but to remind you that the pain from that moment changed an entire airline. She gestured toward the large sign behind her Dignity, Equity, Excellence. The new North Star is not built on privilege. It is built on the courage of those who believe every passenger deserves respect and every employee deserves to be heard. The applause this time rose deeper, louder, as though reaching the glass ceiling above. After the ceremony, Madison and Terence returned to the new CEO operations room, no longer the cold, imposing office of old, but an open, bright space filled with photographs documenting North Star's rebirth. Terence handed her an updated report. Customer satisfaction is up 27%. Discrimination-related complaints are down 81%. Employees say they feel seen for the first time in years. Madison nodded, a quiet emotion swelling in her chest. Not pride, not triumph. Peace, something she had rarely felt in her life. "Good," she said softly. "But never let the numbers make us forget the real goal, people." Terence smiled. "That was the first lesson you taught me." Madison fell silent for a moment, remembering the morning she was dragged from her first-class seat, remembering Terence's apologetic eyes, remembering the humiliation she had forced herself to swallow so she could focus on a business deal that would bring thousands of jobs. And she knew everything had happened for a reason. If that day had not happened to her, thousands of others would still suffer in silence. When the final announcement of the day appeared, Terence turned to her, gratitude shining in his eyes. Top business schools are adding North Star to their leadership curriculum as the most successful cultural transformation case of the decade. Madison let out a soft laugh. Not bad for an airline that once kicked me down to economy. They both looked out toward the airport, where new North Star planes with updated logos were taking off into the red glow of sunset. Each aircraft carried the story of rebirth Madison had set in motion. Taking out her phone, she reread the message Terence had sent the night before. "We did it. But I know there are many places waiting for someone like you." Madison smiled and replied, "Not waiting for me. Waiting for you. Waiting for all of us." And as a plane pierced through the clouds, the sun poured fire across the runway, as if passing a torch to those who would continue the work, and Madison understood. True legacy is not the revolution. It is what is built afterward. It is what remains when she leaves this room, leaves North Star, leaves this sky to begin the next journey. A journey she was born to walk. A journey not to claim a first-class seat, but to change what that seat means. From the perspective of a specialist in organizational culture and power dynamics, the journey of Madison Hayes reveals an undeniable truth. Lasting change does not begin with policy, nor does it emerge from eloquent speeches. It begins the moment an individual refuses to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. Madison being forced out of her first-class seat was only the spark, but her ability to transform humiliation into strategic action, to turn a moment of injustice into a full-scale restructuring, is what makes her a symbol of a new era. Her story reminds us that real power does not lie in the position one is given, but in the ability to use that position to open doors for others to walk through. If Madison's journey inspires you, please like the video to help spread this message of justice and resolve. Do not forget to subscribe so you never miss stories that have the power to change the entire sky. And before you go, comment the phrase "Stand up" to remind us all that sometimes it only takes one person rising at the right moment for an entire system to change.